Hello, I'm Lauri Õunapuu, a hobby folklorist from Estonia. After a year's break, I'm delighted to talk to you again about the folk dances of the Baltic countries. I would also like to thank the leaders of this project for their support and for having me. Before we proceed, I would like to mention that the videos included in this presentation are not my own. They are samples of folk music and dances sourced from many YouTube channels and archives. I have included them to provide a richer context and visual representation of the topics we are discussing. I would like to thank everyone who took the time to record and make these video clips. Your contribution is of great importance to the success of this presentation. Thank you very much. So, let's dance on with it. To begin with, we must again explain one important aspect. Namely, when we talk about the folk dances of the Baltic countries region, the newer folk dances, we always come to the question, are these new, originally high society ballroom dances and salon dances still our folk dances? The question "we" is increasingly relevant. Who are these us? It's clear that the line between us and them can be pretty blurry. If you look at the world map, well, sometimes people talk about, for example, that we like African dances, South American rhythms, or even more colossally, Indian music is awesome. Well, let's take a look at this map of us and them. India and Latvia versus Africa. Part of South America. Well, what can I say here? But if we add here another dimension, the past. The past of historical axis, the matter is even more complicated. So, are the dances that were born somewhere else 100 or 200 years ago and which we dance now as the dances of our people, are they still the dances of our people? Why and how, you may ask? If the music has changed, the dance movements have been adapted by our people, the original authors have been forgotten, then there is nothing left to admit but that this absolutely corresponds to the concept of ours. But it cannot be denied that the story of the birth of all these musical arrangements and their arrival in our villages is really exciting. Yes, and I must also say that no cultural phenomenon is ever born out of thin air. Each inspiration originates from the work of its ancestors. It is adapted and modified according to the norms of and understandings of a new era. Well, for example, we don't have any questions when we look at museum, the Baltic folk clothing. They are undoubtedly our folk clothes, but even the makers of those tailors of those times had something that they took over from somewhere else. And of course vice versa, just as they have influenced us, we have influenced them also. They're on the other side of imaginary border between us and them. a thin line between fashions, sewing machine, singer, and a village girl with a needle. But let's get to the point, so as not to become ethnocentric, boring and sentimental. The story of Padespaan. Well, who does not know the famous folk dance? Padespans, Padespaan, Padispanas, which a large, really huge part of Europe considers to be their own folk dance. Botispan, Batespan, Botespan, even Swedish Spadespa. It was a big hit everywhere, but of course we'll try to stay here in our Baltic countries, not among American Finns, Mr. Kivi or Swedish violins. Let's watch a dance video from the Baltic countries, and many thanks to the dancers, instrumentalists and cameramen for their wonderful work. Well, Padespaan, as you know, is almost the most famous dance in the dance houses and clubs of the Baltic countries, without which, at least in Estonia, not a single dance event is held. The dance has even been so popular that I know from my own experience that in a completely peripheral village where you don't believe that the young people know any dances at all, they suddenly jump up from their chairs and the Padespaan start to be danced as skillfully as their grandparents who attended dance courses and about 100 years ago. But it's actually from the dance courses that our story of Padespaan begins. The first known mention of Padespaan dancing in Estonia dates back to 1901. Karl Hiob, a prominent dance teacher, by the way, also one of the first science fiction translators from southern Estonia, advertised a dance course in a newspaper. Hiob, who had lived in the Latvian-Estonian twin town of Valga, left two conflicts in his cultural work. As we can see here in the newspaper, he lists the dances he teaches. Well, of course, there were more. And he brings out the dances that seem more fashionable and could be covered in one advertisement. And you will certainly come across many famous ballroom dances that have now become folk dances. Vengerka among them. Well, maybe we'll talk about Vengerka later on. Karl Hiob was the first to bring quite a few ballroom dances to Estonia. He called himself the chief director of the dance arts, the superior master teacher of the art of dance, plastics and social etiquette, and the first and only dance teacher in Livonia, the only certified dance teacher in Baltic lands. Quite a resume, don't you think? Nevertheless, in some points, as humorous as it may seem, he was right in his own way. As we said, he leaves Valga due to conflicts, goes to Germany for a short time to learn chemistry, and takes a new name, Karl Helmer. This departure is certainly one of the reasons why the dances he taught became famous. He started giving courses all over Estonia. The courses were multilingual. Dances of France were taught in French. Some dances were taught in German. Some phrases and instructions were given in Russian. Helmer's ideal was a refined fine person with manners and behavior that he would teach in addition to dances to his students. Well, for example, he taught young men to kiss a lady's hand. Actually, the one that I have read about was actually not so young anymore, but lady indeed, for sure. And then send them, the ladies, home after dance lessons. Since Helmer also taught how to conquer women's hearts, some of the young men of that time got their wives. And among these young men were almost a majority of future politicians, businessmen, diplomats. Helmer and his pupils were doing very, very well. The famous Estonian writer Jaan Latik, for example, fell in love with his future wife in Helmer's dance lessons. With his beloved they remained together as long as they lived. Helmer is remembered many Estonian cultural figures, among them also choreographers. To teach aesthetics and dance at the same time, this too was probably a sign of the times back then. Its examples were many published books and, of course, similar courses abroad. Well, for example, the famous dance and behavior textbook published under the name of Elias Howe in 1858. The likes of which definitely had an influence in other countries as well, but maybe about it a little later. It must be said about Helmer that unfortunately he shared the fate and pattern of quite a few prestigious cultural figures of the time. Although he mentions his diplomas and dance schools in Berlin and Paris, his name is not among those who graduated his ballet schools of this time. He probably got information about his school existence from the newspapers or rumors, and he probably studied dances in St. Petersburg and Moscow in his early years. However, these cities also looked to the west at that time and took the example of attractive Europe, not the grey villages of Russia. No, they wanted to be ideal nobles in their dreams, especially cultured people. But of course, the music footprint of this ballroom was bigger than the high society ballrooms. Helmer Hiob invented at least some of his degrees and giving himself well-sounding names, and nevertheless he was a phenomenal figure who, in addition to the triumph of Padespan, also laid the foundation for many, many dances, for example, a dance, Subota. And as really curious case, it can also be mentioned that dance lessons in schools replaced gymnastics lessons. While the Pushkin school in Estonia refused Helmer's services due to its Estonian national orientation and hired trained dance teachers even from Finland to teach their girls the true folk dances of our own people. Of course, it did not fit Helmer's heart that he was not capable of teaching national folk dances. Anyway, who could call these dances of drunken peasants for a dance at all? So Helmer composed a new ballroom dance based on Estonian folk dances. Linda. Dance Linda. And little could Helmer have guessed that Padespan he brought to the country would one day become a regular folk dance. By the way, when there was a congress of dance teachers in Switzerland at the beginning of the 1930s, Helmer complained that he was disturbed by the new trends turning dance into a competition or even a sport. Helmer agrees Imperial Society of Teachers of Dancing in London statement that dance must be anything but a sport. We want mazurkas and Padespan, not the devil knows what. However, the years passed and the dance courses of the over 60-year-old Helmer dried up. Grateful supporters no longer write checks to the commander-in-chief of the master dances, and the latter writes them himself with the signatures of former sponsors. The result of it, 3 years in prison and increasing insanity and mental illness. In the psychiatric analysis papers, among other things, it's written about Helmer's visions. Different animals, white snakes crawling under the bed and white clouds appearing out of nowhere on the wall, and a scary white one-eyed hippopotamus. So, lads and lasses, be careful with that Padespan, I tell you. But let's go back in time from the white hippos to the white ballrooms. The story of the birth of the Padespan is definitely related to the romantic attitude of the 19th century urban upper class to the wild peasant culture. Ballroom dances were too beautiful. There was no sweat, no passion and rebellious feelings. If the peasants have it, why can't we? They probably ask more and more often. And of course, the glorification of everything exotic and foreign is immediately connected here. In a sense, also parodying, because although they always have everything more beautiful than us, we always know better how things should go. So the story of Padespan reminds a bit of the story of American cakewalk, where black people imitated white people's silly, elegant walks with fancy clothes. And whites started imitating these black imitations and added motifs from the Alps and music brought from England. And it became so popular that the black persons in turn took over these dances again, and this time without humor at all. But Frisian dances appear in many dance-related publications, which teach, among other things, behavior and fine manners. The dances are presented with only a few drawings, but with a very detailed description for those who could not afford dance courses because of their higher cost. Sometimes descriptions reach such a masterclass that it would confuse the brains of even most intelligent math professor. Well, maybe after a while about that. I don't want to focus only on madness and insanity today. In Elias Howe's famous Dance and Behavior book, published in 1958, we find, for example, Redova, Cotillion, Varsovian, Gorlitsa, and among other several different variants of the Spanish waltzes and Espanol. Of course, these dances do not have much to do with Spain. Many of them have been danced with the same names and movements in England long before. But why the publisher Oliver Ditson published a dance book under the name of the famous tailor and inventor, we'll probably never know. But we all know the pseudonym, the man behind it, Elias Howe. We know it perfectly. Maybe that was one of the reasons back then too. Do you know Elias Howe? Yes, you're right. I also was, I think, in a reason, skeptical when I did read about that he wrote about dances, not the sewing machine with an insane invention, a hole on the tip of the needle. A thing what company Singer, a sewing machine company Singer took over and, but it's a long story. But the actual compiler Ditson, we actually know him too. If you draw attention to the fact that, for example, thanks to his first published music, we know today the world's most famous Christmas song with the original title One Horse Open Sleigh. Yes, but it's not Christmas time. So, in short, the passion and need to publish similar exotic and fancy dances with similar catchy melodies also hit Tsarist Russia. The first detailed description of the dances is from year 1901. And the first preserved publication of the dance music and the so-called dance manual, Padespan, is from 1899. But it was probably not the first edition, or at least not the first time the world heard about this dance and music, as various sources indicate that the dance was made already a few years earlier. It's mentioned already in 1898, and I believe it is the same Padespan we are talking about. The print, published in 1899, reads New Dance Padespan. But it is also worth nothing that sometimes even 10 years old dances were advertised as new dances, absolutely new ones. It's also interesting that in the Estonian theater in St. Petersburg were sung funny couplets, couplet songs. Natukene loll. In translated a little bit fool, which were known about at least as early as 1894 to 1896, and which were later sung like this. Maailma peal praegu on käänüd see aeg, mil uudisid leida on asjata vaev, sest vaata, kus iganes näeb nüüd su silm, see tunnistab tarkust on täis kõik maailm. You probably recognize it, this melody, but of course we have no written down melody of that song from those times. Too bad. The creator of the dance and music of Padespan was, as it was written, Tsaarman. Dance teacher Alexander Tsaarman, the son of Alexander Tsaarman, is also remembered very fondly. Also, so many times the passions of the students in his dance classes flare up to such an extent that it was decided to solve the problems in the manner of old musketeers, with blood involved, even to the point of the danger to end Tsaarman courses. Tsaarman has always been noted in Russia as Russian ballet master and composer. In a sense, it is true, as he was born in the Russian Empire in Moscow and died in the Soviet Union in the same city. But let's get back to the question of us and them. Alexander Tsaarman was born in 1873. His parents moved to Moscow around the 1860s. Father Alexander, and in turn his father, the third Alexander, lived in Riga, probably having settled there in the 1840s at latest. However, the name form of several generations of Tsaarmans in Riga is presented in the newspapers of Livonia as Estonian, Saarman. Where did the Saarmans of Riga came from? It needs to clarify. We have tried to explain it in cooperation with experienced history and genealogy enthusiasts, but so far this work has not borne fruit yet. It is possible that the Riga Saarmans came from Estonia's Saaremaa or Sangaste, as there are possible candidates for it, but it is also not ruled out that they could have been Jewish or Baltic German. Why not also Latvians? However, Padespan is gaining fame from its new exotism and vigor. The dance was modeled on the Spanish dances. It is also possible that the patterns of the dance were limited to the illustrations and dance lessons published in dance book, because the father of Tsaarman, who worked as an artist in the Prohorovsky fabric factory, probably did not have enough money and opportunities to send his student son to Spain. But looking at the original descriptions and illustration of Padespan, we have to admit the same thing that the dance teachers at the time also admitted. A dance that became popular all over Europe, especially Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, Ukraine. It was no longer the same dance that Tsaarman made. No. New folk dance was a completely new dance based on the motifs and of the old dance. In the ballroom, and ball houses. Padespan was even refused to include it in the repertoire because the people who came there danced the dance of the peasants and not the fancy set image of the bouquet of the romantic Spanish dances. Of course, that was a bit over the top here, but I hope you get the point. Anyway, the folklore is unstoppable. As we know now, it was barely a year or two when the chief masters of the dancing gods taught the dance hundreds of kilometers far and elsewhere, still called by its old name, Padespan. The dance becomes the standard, so composers begin to create new works with the call Padespan also. For the dance to be danceable with several melodies, new Padespan, Schwarz Padespan, Padespan number 3, what is number 2? And of course, Theodor Detlav's Padespan. While many of these arrangements and new creations did not enjoy much popularity, Detlav's did. Of course, we know Detlav from the famous piano factory Detlav and Company, which he made together with even more famous piano celebrity and maker Zimmermann. Detlav was an improviser. He played the piano while improvising for dances. He started writing down his melodies only because mesmerized people demanded so. He also created one of the variants of famous Vengerka Dragon. But maybe more on that later on. Detlav, aga Theodor, or Theodor Josifovich Detlav in German, again a Russian composer by the name, whose parents came to Moscow through a long way, through Poland, Ukraine and Belarus, but the beginning of the moving was Germany, Kiel, where Detlav's grandfather's home was. After the insane year of 1917, they moved to Denmark. Detlav's Padespan has also offered the joy of discovery to different composers, at least in Latvia. Maybe you have heard, dear Balts, those wonderful nights. Estonia, however, in the 1930s, Padespan became famous by singer Alexander Arder, singing the words of famous poet Anna Haava. Forgive me, for I love you. Anna andeks, et ma armastan sind. Which in turn the Latvians translated and sang the song in Estonian proper in their own way. Estonian. Anna andeks, et ma armastan sind. Artur Rinne is singing. Bellakord elektroorkestra.
Anna andeks, et armastan sind, et sinule üksinda tuksub minu rind. Kui tahad mind põlada, põlga siis mind, ma lähen ja leinan ja armastan sind.
Latvian version of it, the same orchestra, different singer.
Tuot Camilla summa, taus vastata musica ausismanska. Se vino parmanitis meie sugan, taus manit arnisis Camilla summan.
Of course, the lyrics, as I told, are from Estonian Anna Haava's poetry. But anyway, the popularity of Padespan is also shown by the fact that these same slightly changed words of Anna Haava, which first appeared in print 1888. Padespan was already sung as early as 1906 in Estonia, namely the antique game lillede keel, the language of the flowers. It was printed in Estonian entertainment book Lõbus seltsiline, it was Happy Companion. You ask a question from anyone in the game from opposite sex, like in a code word. You ask Alpine Rose and give your card or a sheet of paper with questions to the one you want answer. And he or she looks at the Alpine Rose question and there is like, you are hurting me willingly. And she answers with another flower name, code word, murtud süda, which is in English a common bleeding heart. Common bleeding heart, and gives a card back where lies the answer. Anna andeks, et ma armastan sind. Which is the lyrics of Padespan redone. What a romantic way to learn songs and remember this, the smells of virgin flowers, which do not smell at all like former ballrooms and dance classes, which were often compared even in their aroma bouquet to sports halls. How does a dance club in Baltic countries smell today? In conclusion, the characteristics and the spread of the dance melody in the Baltic countries can be seen in the way the melody phrases align with local poetry. For example, in Estonia, the melody line's first phrase matches the rhythm of Anna Haava's poetry. In Tsarman's original melody, there is only the phrase without the end beats. Estonian one. Anna andeks, et ma armastan sind. Original Tsarman and Russian village words are just like Padespanchika Rossiski Tantsik. And so we get the idea how the melody spread in Baltic countries. And for our ending of this chapter, of course, Lithuania, 12 points. Until next episode, dear Bolts. Thank you.